Welcome to Drawdown Marin. I'm Supervisor Damon Connolly and want to thank each of you for coming. We're excited to see such a big crowd attending this event, and perhaps it is not so surprising given what is at stake both locally and globally. We are here to launch a campaign to put Marin County at the forefront of California's efforts to reverse global warming. It's going to take a combined effort of every segment of our community, and our purpose in launching this campaign is to engage businesses, residents, and government on how we can and must make a difference working together. I'd first like to acknowledge our elected officials in the audience. If you could stand up. Come on, you guys. Let's give them a round of applause. I'd also like to thank each of the ambassadors and their organizations in the lobby for committing their time to provide guidance on how to take action. Will you join me in giving them a round of applause? How many here are students or teachers? If I can see a show of hands. All right. How about from a chamber of commerce or from a business organization? Excellent. An environmental group? And the bonus question, how many folks here are environmentalists? Everyone's hand up, come on. But really that response points to a natural strength of Marin, that we have a solid foundation upon which to build. As but one example, Marin pioneered the state's first community choice aggregation program that allows everyone to opt up to 100% renewable energy. Marin's leadership in creating MCE Clean Energy has served as a model for other regions in the state. We ask tonight that all individuals and businesses sign on to Deep Green 100% renewable energy. What do you think about that? We will hear tonight both the environmental and economic case on why each of us needs to take action, and that bold change is both possible and necessary. The stakes could not be more clear, especially given the lack of action in Washington. The impacts of climate change are not an abstraction in Marin. San Francisco Bay has risen 8 inches in the past 100 years, and with accelerated warming, it may rise up to 70 inches by the end of this century. Our major roads are regularly inundated, as demonstrated by extended closures of Highway 37 this winter and frequent flooding at the Manzanita Park and Ride in southern Marin. When we look at how to adapt to rising seas, we are faced with seemingly impossible questions. Whose land do we build infrastructure to protect? Businesses, sewage treatment plants, homes, apartment buildings? Climate change multiplies the challenges of global instability, hunger, poverty, and conflict on both an international scale and locally. Our Marin neighborhoods that are most susceptible to sea level rise, like the Santa Fe Canal, are also often our most underserved communities. We mean it when we say we're all in this together. Government cannot do this alone. Individuals cannot stop climate change alone. Businesses cannot single-handedly reduce climate change. Coming together as a community will pay for itself in many ways. It improves health. When we eliminate our emissions, we can decrease the incidence of asthma, which a striking 16% of adults in Marin have. We can decrease the incidence of type 2 diabetes and other health problems by improving access to better food and more effective bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure. It builds resilience. Research shows that in the face of major climate events like fire and flooding, which we know we face here locally, neighborhoods where people know each other and look out for each other have the lowest mortality rates and recover more quickly. It helps the economy. We now live in an era where the cost of solar-powered energy is competitive with, if not cheaper than, coal and natural gas, and is a source of job creation. That's pretty cool. So today is a kickoff to an engaged and resilient Marin. The Board of Supervisors adopted a resolution this morning committing to working with county staff and community leaders to develop and implement policies and create incentives that will achieve dramatic greenhouse gas reductions. The county will host 5 events on each of the 5 pillars of action that you will hear more about tonight. We hope that you will continue with us on this path and help us expand the conversation to your friends, neighbors, and colleagues. For your convenience, there is a colorful postcard that I'm now holding up in your program that can give you some ideas on actions you may want to take. Individual actions will be the difference between meeting Marin's ambitious goals and falling short. And falling short is not an option. Throughout the evening, please write any questions you have on the index cards also located in your program. Pass your questions to the aisle to be included in the conversation we're very much looking forward to having this evening. I will now turn the evening over to Dana Armanino, who is a senior planner on the County of Marin Community Development Sustainability Team. She's a leader in the environmental movement in her own right, and Dana will give you an introduction to what a climate action plan is and what the county has done to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So thank you very much, everyone, and please join me in welcoming Dana.
Good evening, everyone. I am so impressed by this turnout. Generally, at my community events, we have about 30, 40 people, a lot of the same faces, which is great. I love the engagement, but I love seeing all the new faces tonight. I'm just so inspired by all of you. So I've been asked to give a little bit of background on the county's climate action plan history and some data and facts and figures, and then was also told to be aspirational. So we'll see how I do on that. So, on to the history. Let's see, there we go. In Marin's Climate Action Plan history began in 2002 when the Marin County Board of Supervisors adopted a resolution recognizing the threat of climate change and joining the Cities for Climate Protection. With those marching orders, the county staff went ahead and completed a baseline inventory of our emissions. Inventories that are used for climate action plans look at emission sources that a local government can impact through policies and programs. The county's baseline emissions inventory looked at the greenhouse gases that are emitted from our buildings, the operating and powering of them, both our residential and businesses and public buildings. It also looked at the emissions associated with the waste we generate, the emissions from the cars we drive, and from our agricultural operations. Once we had our community baseline emissions inventory, the Board of Supervisors adopted a target for reductions. they set a target of reducing our baseline 1990 emissions to 15% below that level by the year 2020. For reference, the state's climate planning target, adopted I believe in 2000 as part of the Assembly Bill 32, was to get statewide emissions back down to 1990 levels. So by adopting a 15% reduction target, Marin was already leading the way in the state. Let's see if we can get the next slide there. So then in 2006, the county adopted what we called a greenhouse gas reduction plan. At that time, the term climate action plan, or what we also call a CAP, hadn't even been coined. We were one of the first jurisdictions in the state to adopt a climate action plan. A lot of the measures that were included in that greenhouse gas reduction plan were then incorporated into our countywide general plan that was adopted in 2007. The county wasn't working alone. If we could get one more slide there. The county wasn't working alone. Our cities and towns were also looking to reduce their emissions and address climate change within their own jurisdictions. And in 2008, all Marin jurisdictions came together to form the Marin Climate and Energy Partnership. While each jurisdiction has its own climate action plan and its own targets, we all work together to try and leverage our resources to maximize our potential for emissions reductions. Then in we skipped ahead. There we go. Spoiler alert. In 2015, the Board of Supervisors adopted an updated climate action plan. As part of that process, we did an updated emissions inventory and found that as of the year 2012, we had actually met our goal of reducing community emissions to 15% below 1990 levels. We had achieved our goal 8 years ahead of schedule, but we decided not to stop there, and as part of that updated climate action plan, the board adopted a new target for 2020, which is 30% below 1990 levels. And then in 2016, if we can get one more click, the final Marin jurisdiction adopted a climate action plan. We now have every single jurisdiction in Marin that has climate action plans, and again, even though we have these individual plans, we all do work together via that climate and energy partnership to maximize our program implementation and our reduction efforts. An example of that was achieved this year when all of the jurisdictions came together via the partnership and was able to secure a $275,000 grant to fund our Resilient Neighborhoods program to operate for the next 2 years, which helps implement a lot of measures from all of our CAPs. So we've had these Marin jurisdictions implementing their measures for a few years, and then the question becomes, are we making progress? To address that question and help refine our planning and our implementation, do course corrections, the Climate and Energy Partnership completes community inventories every year. We have completed one this year, and the results are, if we could get another slide, the results are in. We are making progress. Because of the delays in getting data, the most recent year for which we can get complete data for all jurisdictions is the year 2015. We also, in this chart, are looking at a baseline year of 2005 because all of our Marin jurisdictions and many communities throughout the state use 2005 as the reduction baseline because the data is more readily available and more accurate. So in this comparison, we've got the county, which normally in our CAP has a 1990 baseline. Here we're looking back for comparison's sake just to 2005 with all of our other communities. And what you can see here is that countywide, on average, our communities have reduced emissions to 17% below 1990 levels. For reference sake, that Assembly Bill 32 statewide target of getting back to 1990 levels equates to about a 15% reduction below 2005 levels. So we are, on average, exceeding the statewide target, and in many cases, many of our jurisdictions are exceeding it. The progress we're making is very encouraging. Yes, we're going in the right direction through cleaning our energy supply, supporting energy efficiency programs, adopting more stringent green building codes, but there is much more to do. And if we could get one more slide. You can see here, if we want to continue on the track to meet the statewide goal of reducing community emissions to 80% below 1990 levels. We've got a ways to go. We're not done yet. We can't stop. And it's going to take every single one of us. We can't accomplish this goal as a few individuals or as just local governments. I am continually inspired by individuals and community groups that are out there at the forefront and are fighting climate change. But at this point, we need that passion and will to spread to everyone in Marin. We've identified strategies and associated steps that each of you can take now. Across all of Marin's cities and towns and the county, our climate action plan measures can be distilled down into 5 strategies that will help move the county of Marin to a carbon-free future. These strategies align our measures with the state's climate strategy, allowing us to support California's goals while also taking a leadership position within the state. The first one is shifting to 100% renewable power, including the countywide adoption of electricity from 100% renewable sources, and shifting away from fossil fuel energy, including diesel, natural gas, and propane. An easy first step on this is switching your home or your business to 100% renewable electricity. It can be done with just a couple of clicks. The county, Marin Municipal Water District, and many of our cities and towns have taken the lead in this position by switching their own accounts to 100% clean energy. Two, low carbon transportation, which includes the rapid adoption of electric vehicles across all modes and expands the alternative transportation modes, including walking and biking. I've been an electric car owner for almost 3 years now, and I have to say that I'm never going back to an internal combustion engine. When I was considering making the switch, I had the range anxiety that everyone talks about. Will I be able to find charging stations? And it turns out, given the excellent ranges these vehicles have, I actually, most of the time, charge at home using my 100% clean energy. If I do have to charge out and about, there are stations all over Marin, and we're working every day to get more stations installed. So it's an easy, great, actually quite fun step to take. 3, increase energy efficiency of buildings and appliances. Resources are available in the county to assist homeowners and businesses with identifying and installing more efficient equipment. You don't have to do this alone. The county and MCE Clean Energy has resources and incentives ready for you. And in addition to monthly bill savings, you are going to end up with a more comfortable home, and who wouldn't want a more comfortable home? 4, harnessing the power of Marin's agricultural lands and open space to sequester carbon that has already been released to the atmosphere. The Marin Carbon Project and the Marin Resource Conservation District are doing amazing, industry-leading work in this area. They have developed 10 carbon farm plans for our local ranches and have implemented 3 demonstration sites. You can also support these efforts by supporting locally grown foods. This step supports local ranchers that are doing their part and also eliminates the emissions associated with transporting food long distances. And going to the farmer's market is a great way to get to know where your food comes from and get connected to your community. 5, develop a climate-resilient community that ensures that our natural and built environments are resilient to climate change impacts and that our community is prepared for emergencies. Marin County ranks 2nd of the 9 Bay Area counties for projected risk of impacts from sea level rise flooding. We are already experiencing flooding with high tides and storms. This is not an abstract concept that may happen in the future. It's already happening today, and the impacts are expected to increase in severity and frequency as sea levels rise. The county has 2 sea level rise assessment projects underway, one for our coastal community and one for our bayside that's being done in partnership with our cities and towns. You can support these efforts by getting plugged into the Marin Sea Level Rise projects and getting educated on it, and then also by getting your home and your family prepared for emergencies that may arise from future flooding and potential wildfires that can be a result of climate change impacts. If you haven't already visited the posters and stations out in the lobby, I strongly encourage you all to do that after the rest of the speakers tonight. We have ambassadors available to bring you up to date on what's happening in each of the areas and how you can take an action immediately to make a strong impact. We hope that tonight will enlighten all of you to the role each of us can play in helping Marin draw down our emissions and make a healthy green future for all of us. Thank you again for sharing your time and your interest tonight. And now let's take a few minutes before the next speakers to imagine what is possible if each and every one of us around the world chooses to act starting tonight. Thank you.
One day, we will wake up to find that the energy that powers the alarm clock came from the breeze through the trees the night before. And we will go to work that morning riding the rays of the sun. It will light our cities and power our businesses. It will warm our homes and cool our workplaces. It will reduce sources of conflict and fuel our economies. It will connect us all. It won't scar the land or poison the seas. The food we eat will be good for our bodies and good for the planet. And the weather that day won't make us worry for tomorrow. There will be more jobs and less disease. The sea level will stop rising. And species will stop dying. The question is, how do we get to that day from where we are today? All 7.3 billion of us. We start by deciding that beyond our doubts and differences, such a day truly exists. And that is something each of us can do today. We can make today the day we stop thinking that the changes required to get there are impossible and beyond us, and start realizing that they are not only possible, but what the future requires of us. We must stop turning from the warnings of science and fear and denial, and instead turn toward the solutions and partnerships we need. We can make today the day we stop pointing at each other in blame, and instead chart a new course together. We have never faced a crisis this big, but we have never had a better opportunity to solve it. We have everything we need to wake up to a different kind of world. We need our leaders to be brave and their choices to be bold. They will either remember us as the generation that destroyed its home, or the one that finally came to respect it. We have every reason in the world to act. We can't wait until tomorrow. This is our only home. You can choose today to make a world of difference.
All right, hello everyone. My name is Cameron Evans, and I am a 16-year-old junior at the Marin School of Environmental Leadership.
And my name's Mila Weatherall, and I'm a 15-year-old sophomore at San Domenico School in San Anselmo.
Milo and I were asked to be here tonight due to our community engagement in several environmentalist projects around Marin. My personal involvement started when last year I worked on a project just for school. I was partnered with an organization called iMatter that gets teens involved with their local government. I myself, when my group decided to create a report card that graded the city of Santa Fe on how well they were doing to combat climate change. And later that semester, we actually went to Santa Fe City Council and presented them with a report card in which we told them they earned a B. And at the same time, we gave them a climate inheritance resolution, which committed them to two main things, which were number one, to aggressively work to update the climate change action plan, and number two, creating an ongoing system so that the youth could lend their voice to this matter, since it's our future and we deserve a say in it.
My contribution to the Marin environmentalist community was the founding of a youth group called Generation Our Climate. Earlier this year, I'd say maybe April, a few of my friends and I at my school recognized that one of the biggest problems with the environmental crisis is that we have a lot of adults talking about a solution and no youth being able to contribute to their own future. And so we created a youth group called Generation Our Climate with the focus of encouraging the youth to show leadership and share their voice on this incredible issue.
So Milo and I met earlier this year at a different city council meeting in which the city of Santa Fe was deliberating over the coming year's budget plan and whether or not to allot $27,000 to converting a portion of their energy sources to 100% renewable energy from Marin Clean Energy.
We were both there because we recognized that climate change is a global crisis with local solutions, and that before we petition and lobby Congress for them to pass a major solution that affects the whole United States, we have to start right here in Marin County, and we recognize Santa Fe as a great place to start.
That night, I also brought up to the council that this was an opportunity not only for them to better their grade and uphold the climate inheritance resolution, but also a chance for them to become a leader. Earning a B on this report card, which is based on the climate scientist of former NASA scientist, now world-leading climate scientist, Dr. James Hansen, was quite successful compared to the other cities in California, let alone the country. They are already quite a leader. However, I urge the city to see that this simply was not enough. By forcing themselves to do something, to become A students and pick themselves up, it forces other areas around us to look at themselves also and say, am I really doing enough? This same logic can be applied here tonight. A lot of us, as we said at the beginning, are environmentalists, but are we doing enough? And as we continue to stand up and continue to take control, not only do we have our own impact, we have the power to impact those around us to also step up and take a role.
One of the biggest things we learned that night is that while climate change is a global solution, it is a global crisis and has local solutions. Each and every single one of us plays a role in the solution. Me and Cameron are no NASA scientists, yet here we are speaking to all of you about the need to act on climate change. We don't all need to have PhDs to make change. We just need to be regular, everyday citizens doing what we know is right. And that means showing up to hearings and testifying and sharing our mind and writing to our representatives in local, county, state, and federal government and saying, we need to act now.
And finally, the great thing about climate change, hear me out, is that we have a chance to rebuild something new and something better. Look at Puerto Rico right now, ravaged by hurricane, completely destroyed. What if we took this destruction and we built something amazing out of it? Think about putting in green infrastructure, systems that weren't built on having an excess of resources, systems that are built to last.
Imagine a world of equity, of people living happy, healthy lives, and future generations looking up at the sky and seeing blue.
At the end of that film, Morgan Freeman said, today you can choose to make a world of difference. Today is that day. We are the people. Today we make a change.
Today, Today, we make change here in Marin, but tomorrow we'll change the world.
All right, thank you. And now to introduce the grown-ups. We'd like to welcome to the stage Executive Editor and Chairman of GreenBiz Inc., Joel McCower.
Let's give it up for Cameron and Milo. Wow. I so want to be them when I grow up. Good evening, everyone. Really exciting to be here. There's a great crowd, and I know there's a overflow room and people who couldn't get in. And so thank you for being here, and thank you for what you already do. This is, as Cameron and Milo were saying, this is about the change we want to see in the world and how it begins in Marin. And of course, it's almost a cliche to say that this is an exciting and scary time. We've got huge chaos and winds and storms and hatred, and that's just in the White House. You know? And we've got a lot going on. I think you all read the news. You're all pretty know what's going on. It's also an incredibly exciting time. There is so much exciting developments and innovations taking place. I have the great good fortune to work for a company called GreenBiz Group that we wake up every day thinking about what's possible, thinking about the innovations, the companies, the citizens, the innovators, the students that are thinking about and working on how to integrate and do that transformation and all the things that are possible and all the opportunity that Morgan Freeman was talking about, that Cameron and Milo were talking about. And it's very, very cool. So we're going to get into some of that today. We're going to talk about what's possible. And we're going to explore both at the high level and also at the Marin level. What does that look like? How do we think about this? Yes, electric cars, solar, and wind are part of this, but there's a lot more to it. So, and how do we do that? How do we think about an economy that aligns prosperity and security and sustainability and gives each of them equal weight? How do we make this inclusive? How do we ensure that everybody gets a chance to be part of this green, clean, sustainable, better economy that we're all talking about? How does this get to all citizens at all income levels, opportunity for everyone? That's what we're going to talk about in a minute. I'm also well aware that so many of you here or watching this could be up here, because so many of you are doing the work, leading the charge here in Marin, and thank you for all of that. We're going to take it up a notch tonight with the two people I'm about to introduce, and looking at what's going on in the world and how what's happening here in Marin is and can increasingly be part of a much bigger global revolution that's taking shape. So with that, I'm really excited to welcome two people who are both friends and leaders in sustainability globally, and also happen to be two of Marin's finest. So Leah Seligman runs the climate program for the B team. We'll talk a little bit about what that is. And, okay, you can come out. Great, all right. It's going to do the big reveal, but no, it's good. Here. And prior to that, Leah was the Chief Sustainability Officer for NRG Energy, which is the largest independent power producer in the country. And also, I have to say that at the time that she became the Chief Sustainability Officer, I think was probably, if not, probably the youngest CSO in the Fortune 500 in corporate America, certainly in the energy industry, and has long been a leader in sustainability and climate change. And Paul Hawken, I think a lot of you, most of you know Paul, maybe personally, been in Marin a long time, has been an environmentalist since he was 20, and that was a while ago, but back when he started a natural food store, and been a prolific author even before he did The Ecology of Commerce, which is a breakthrough landmark book, influenced a lot of us about what's possible and how the potential of sustainable business. Wrote other books, and then most recently, I won't go through the whole litany because there's a lot of them, but most recently is the editor of Drawdown, a book that really takes, we're going to talk about it, but sort of gives a comprehensive and exciting view of what's possible with climate change. Please welcome Paul Hawken. So I think since this is called Drawdown Marin, let's start with Drawdown and talk a little bit about, for people who don't know the premise of the book, who didn't watch Bill Maher on Friday night. So what is Drawdown about?
Well, the name drawdown in a climate context refers to the first time on a year-to-year basis where greenhouse gases peak and go down on a year-to-year basis. And Project Drawdown was established just 4 years ago to see if it was possible. And not only to see if it was possible, but to see if it was possible with technologies, techniques, and practices that we already know how to do, that exist, that are hands-on, that are practiced, that are already scaling. In other words, not, pie in the sky, silver bullet kind of things that people talk about, but the stuff that we know how to do and are doing right now. And so that's what we did. We measured and modeled the 100 most substantive solutions to reversing global warming. And what we did is basically use all peer-reviewed literature on the science side, on the carbon side, and on the economic side, which is much more difficult than the carbon, I must say. We use respected international institutions, the IEA, International Energy Agency, the IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the World Bank, Bloomberg, FAO. In other words, respected institutions. So none of the data in Project Drawdown or the book is actually our data. What we did do is continue to scale these solutions. They are scaling in a rigorous but reasonable way over 30 years, and did the total button, see what it showed us.
So how does the idea of drawdown differ from what we typically talk about when we talk about climate change?
Well, what we typically talk about with climate change is underwhelming. We talk about reduce and slowing down and stabilization and mitigation. Mitigation is the common word. Does anybody really know what that means? I mean, you think it means stop, don't you? I think they meant militate in the IPCC. They use mitigation. Mitigation means to lessen the severity and pain or seriousness of something, which seems really an odd goal, given that civilization is at stake here, and that we should just lessen it. I mean, a little bit, it's kind of like Thelma and Louise in slow motion. We're going down the wrong road, and says, can we just slow down and go over this cliff a little more slowly? And that has been the goal. And so it's really important for us as a collaboration to name the goal. And when you name a goal, people say, well, it's too ambitious. And it's not ambitious. It's just because the other goal was underwhelming doesn't mean we're ambitious. And it's the only goal that makes sense. And we felt that when you name the goal, it actually opens things up. Actually, it doesn't make it more difficult. It actually makes it easier. It's more spacious. There's more innovation, more creativity. Humans respond to that. They don't respond to narrow goals. And frankly, mitigation and stabilization is a narrow goal.
So Leah, we'll come back to some of those goals. A lot more to talk about what's in the book. Leah, talk about what is the B team? Richard Branson, Desmond Tutu, a number of big, heavy-duty global leaders. What is it, and what does it do?
So I like to say the B team is not the A team. We are focused on, it's a group of business and civil society leaders that have come together to transform business to be more sustainable. And that looks at both social and environmental impacts. And so we've got people like Richard Branson, one of our co-founders, Johan Zeitz, the former CEO of Puma, but also Mary Robinson, the former president of Ireland, Sharon Burrow, the General Secretary of the International Trade Union Confederation, Christiana Figueres, who if you guys are climate groupies like I am, you might know who she is. All coming together to create collective platforms that really challenge business to transform from the way we originally incentivized businesses to think more holistically around their impacts.
And talk about the program that you run.
So I have the pleasure of creating their collective platform on climate. And what the program is net zero by 2050. So I like a good target in my title. And we are really focusing on decoupling economic growth from greenhouse gas emissions. And so our goal is to accelerate a just transition to net zero by 2050, economy-wide.
So you've got a lot of experience in looking at sort of how do you create an overarching framework for transforming an economy around climate change, and how do you sort of look at 2030, 2040, 2050? Do you see what's going on so far? The kinds of commitments that counties like Marin and others are making, is that what we need to be doing? Is that the kind of goals we need to be setting and the kind of pace we need to be proceeding?
So I think Marin has shown tremendous leadership. The one thing I would say that's missing from our goal in Marin is a date. And there are actually very clear dates for action to plug into the global framework. 2018, we need to be ready to show our cards, and we'll have the opportunity to host here in California the global community to demonstrate all the action that's taken place, and I think that's a great moment to highlight what's going on in Marin.
This is Governor Brown's Global Climate Action Summit that's going to be in San Francisco in the second week of September, and it's bringing together all the subnational leaders on climate change from around the world, so state and local leaders.
State, local leaders, business is going to be there in force. I think this is a moment where all of us can stand up and say we are taking climate change seriously. 2020, we need to peak global emissions. So that means we have to bend the curve. Right now we're on a trajectory that is far exceeding planetary boundaries. By 2020, we need to have bent that so that we are on a curve down in terms of emissions. And 2050, we have to be net zero. So I think the place where Marin can really show some leadership is putting some dates to the ambition.
Paul, I know that as a fellow writer, I admire that the language matters in how you talk about and how we should all be talking about carbon. And we talk about carbon neutral, carbon negative, and that's not necessarily the right framing. Did I get that right?
Well, there's two issues. One is science, getting the science right. The other is motivation. So the language around climate is generally war metaphors and negativity. And I can combat climate change, fight climate change, slashing emissions, the carbon war room, decarbonization, negative emissions. Does that inspire you? And the problem with that language is that, first of all, you can't fight change. Good luck. The climate changes every nanosecond, and it always will, and thank God it does, because it produces weather and evolution and glaciers and melting and drought and rain and all the other things that we love about this beautiful planet. So the fact is we don't want to fight change. And if you do, it's Don Quixote. And so nothing will happen. So what we want to do, basically, is deal with what we are doing down here, not up there, which is basically global warming, and so changing our activity here. And the other thing about the language, which is decarbonization is the word that's used. Well, and we saw carbon-free Marin. You better hope not. You're all made of carbon. So we don't want to use carbon-free. It's actually the other way around. Decarbonization is the name of the problem. We took in land use and with fossil fuels, coal, gas, and oil, and we put it up there. We decarbonized. So that can't be the name of the solution. The name of the solution is recarbonization. is bring it back home. But again, in a deeper sense, I just think that the problem with fighting climate change is that it makes it other, like it's an enemy, like it's bad, and that we're right, and that we're good, and we're going to somehow smite it down. And that is dualism. That's dual mind. And that thinking is what got us into this situation. Thinking that there's other places, other people, other races, you know. And that's not going to get us out. And what is going to get us out is to do what carbon does, which basically is the element that holds hands and collaborates. And that's what we have to do.
So let's talk a little bit about some of the solutions that you write about in Drawdown and that you were working on at B Team. I think it's, when we talk about climate, we think of in solutions. We typically sort of go through solar and wind and electric cars and efficiency and maybe organic or food or eating less meat. There's sort of a litany of things that are real and important, and they're sort of the to-do list. It's really fascinating what Drawdown came up with. First of all, that the number one solution ranked by impact, top of the list, refrigeration.
Yeah, we were so disappointed.
Well, why? Why were you disappointed? First of all, explain what it is.
We want the number one to be sexier, that's all. It's anything but that. Well, it's so interesting because we did this for 2.5 years, and the model we use has everything interlinked. You can't model a solution by itself. It's not, you can, but it's not good data. And so we actually didn't have the data until February, 2 months before the book was published this year. And we hit the total button, and there it came out, brrr, and we were shocked. In a good way, maybe, but we were shocked, so surprised. And at that time, a friend who is a IPCC lead author, professor, written books, probably one of the 100, 200 greatest experts in the world on climate, called and said, hey, how's it going? I said, it's going really great. We just got the numbers, and we're sort of shocked, and said, I said, I don't think anybody in the world knows the top 5 solutions to global warming. No one. I mean, Christina Figueres, Jeffrey Sachs, Al Gore, Ban Ki-moon, me for sure. No one. And the person said, what are they? And I said, you tell me. And they said they went right away, the electric cars, and electric cars, no, be mass transit, and this and that, well, we got solar, and I was listening, making notes. And then they finally said, okay, here they are, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Not in order, just the 5. And they said, how did I do? I said, that wasn't the point of the question. I said, well, what was the point? I said, here you are, one of the most extraordinary, well-informed, educated people in the world on this subject, and look how long it took you to come up with 5. What about the rest of the world, the other 7.36 billion people? What do they know if you don't know? And then the person said, oh, you're right. He said, well, how did I do? They're all wrong. I said, they're all wrong. They really were. And so would we all have been wrong. I would have been wrong. I'm not trying to put this person down at all. I'm just saying, isn't it extraordinary after 40 years of being in the public sphere that we didn't know the top 5, 6, 7, 8, 10? And you could argue them, by the way, and that would be fine. But they would still reconfigure in such a way that we didn't know. And so
refrigeration
management is HFCs, is hydrofluorocarbons, which replaced Freon. Freon was burning a hole in the ozone layer, so we came up with a new refrigerant. And that is one of the most powerful greenhouse gases there is. And it's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, some of them are 9, 10,000 times more powerful than CO2 as a greenhouse gas, and they're being released in this country 5 billion pounds a year, in India and other places, in China, even at a much greater rate than that.
So the problem is not the fridges sitting in our kitchens. It's when
the problem is how they're decommissioned.
It's when they leak, or when they get thrown away. Yes. And are crushed, and the refrigerant leaks out.
Yeah, exactly. And we do a pretty good job in this country, actually. It's in countries where it's thrown away, and somebody says wants the copper, and that's it. They want the copper, up goes the gas. Yeah.
So, Leah, a lot of this is about, we all have fridges, freezers. Some people have many of them or several of them. You know who you are.
Whole Foods.
But as Paul's saying, there's a very large swath of the world that doesn't yet have that. How do you see reconciling what needs to happen to bring people into the standard of living that allows them to have basic refrigeration and the sanitation and food storage and all the abilities that come with that? At the same time, we're dealing with this problem of, in effect, too much refrigeration. Is that able to square that circle somehow?
I think that's where the opportunity comes in. And in a lot of places where you're starting with a lot less, you have an opportunity to rethink how you develop and to leapfrog. So I'm not an expert in refrigerants, but I did find that fascinating that it was the most impactful one. I also liked the women and girls, just saying.
We'll get to that.
I'll get to that.
Yeah.
Okay, good. But if you think about places where we're bringing electricity for the first time, 1 billion people do not have access to reliable electricity. And you have two options. You could do what we've done across the developed world, put in big centralized coal plants, gas plants, whatever. Or you could think about another way. And maybe there's a possibility to greatly expand solar and battery storage and do a much more localized energy sources. And I think that's what we have, this amazing opportunity. And if you galvanize business and citizens and development organizations and governments, there's an opportunity to actually think, do we have to do it the way we've always done, or can we rethink something new? And I know I heard the kids that came on before us talking about Puerto Rico and what's possible there. As we think about these communities and what's going to happen as we rebuild and put billions and billions of dollars into them, how do you deploy that money in a way that's smarter and thinking into the future instead of making the same mistakes we've made in the past?
Yeah, I think that's going to be a tough one, because we're going on to rebuild what we had is sort of the status quo is to create the status quo, and that's going to be a lost opportunity if we can't sort of figure out how do we seize the moment to create something much, much better that also will be much more resilient the next time.
But there are people thinking about it already, and there are efforts going on right now in the Caribbean to rethink how you're going to actually build up the Caribbean again, bringing in energy providers from all sorts of different things, bringing in financiers and banks and all of these people together, and they're actually trying to do that. So this maybe it will be a lost opportunity, or maybe it will be a first step to us dealing with the next disaster in a smarter way.
Yeah, I didn't mean to be Debbie Downer there, because
Yeah, man, Joel.
Just a political realist. But we saw some of this in Haiti, because I know you, David Crane, your former boss, led a charge to install solar after the severe damage there. So that it is possible to be doing this. Let's go back to Drawdown. I think just to give the top 10 list is sort of, I mean, you know it by heart, or I've got it right here.
Yeah, I do.
Oh, you do? Okay. I'm not shocked to know that.
11, 12, 13, 14, 2. I wake up thinking about it. Number 1 is refrigerant management. Number 2 is onshore wind. Right? Number 3 is reduced food waste. I want to stop right there. Every data point in the book is conservative. And I'll give you an example right now. Refrigerant management does not include the Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol, which phases out HFCs by 2030. It doesn't include it, all right? Okay, number 2.
What do you mean it doesn't include? Explain that.
We didn't include it because we didn't have sufficient data to model it. And we can't create data. We didn't create data. We have to use data from peer-reviewed articles on carbon. If that data's not there, it's not in our model. So we all know it's almost twice that in terms of impact. And same with onshore wind. While we were doing it, our nose is pressed to the glass, on the cost side, and it is plummeting. in terms of costs of wind, and the growth rate is surging, and it's really cheaper than coal and gas in many areas of the world and becoming more so. And it's growing at a much faster rate than we modeled in ours. Reduce food waste. That is number 3 solution, but what we didn't model is landfill emissions of methane from food that has been placed in landfills, because once you have an anaerobic environment for organic matter, you create methanogenesis, and you create methane, which is 28 to 34 times more powerful than CO2. That doesn't include it. Number 4 is plant-rich diet. You saw it up there, I think. The guy with the pepper lips and the avocado ears, and that's plant-rich diet. And that is actually reducing protein intake in the north or in the so-called developed countries from an unhealthy level of 110, 100 grams per day to a healthy level of 50, 60 at the most, and then increasing that where there is nutrition insufficiency in countries where people do not have enough protein. So we both decreased and increased, and a significant amount of that protein should be, doesn't have to be majority. It's not a vegan diet, it's not a vegetarian diet unless you want to be, but is plant-based. And so that's number 4. Number 5 is protection of tropical forests. And tropical forests are sitting on biomass, both above and, well, they are biomass, and sitting on soils that contain about 860, 70 gigatons of carbon, 160 billion tons of carbon and CO2. And it's about the same amount that's in the atmosphere. So we destroy those, and there's a 2x of what's up there right now. But then number 6 and number 7, number 6 is educating girls. And what that's about is basically allowing girls and supporting girls to continue their education. 65 million girls around the world are yanked out of school for early marriage, to go to work, to support their brothers to go to school, by custom, by religion, by cultural superstition. There's lots of reasons for it. If those girls then really have become women and have about 5 children, they have less income, the children aren't as healthy. I mean, it's not a virtuous circle, it's a vicious cycle for them. If she's allowed to become a woman on more her terms, if not entirely by matriculating to high school, she has about an average of 2 children, all right? And so it's a pathway to family planning, and the number 7 solution is exactly that, family planning, which means clinics to support women's well-being and reproductive health everywhere in the world, not just Africa, but Arkansas, Alabama, And those 2 together then are the difference between pretty much almost the entire difference between the high and median UN population projections for 2050 versus 10.8 billion versus 9.7. And you put those 2 together, and empowering girls and women is the number 1 solution to global warming. And who knew?
So you actually only got to 7, but that's okay. There's a lot there. The 8, 9, and 10 are solar farms, silvopasture.
8 is solar farms, and
Yeah.
9 is solar pasture, and 10 is rooftop solar.
Rooftop solar. So,
Isn't number 1 changing the way we think? You said that earlier.
well, the question was, we're not getting to Q&A, we'll get to that, but since you asked it, was number 1 changing the way we think?
Well, number 1 of everything is to change the way we think, but actually the number 1 solution is actually peace. The number 1, the number 1 source of emissions in the world is war and standing armies. So yeah, but there's no data. Somebody give us the money. We'll do the research. But that is actually number 1.
So, a lot of solutions. Paul mentioned 10 of them. There's 80 in the book, and we'll get into a few more later on, I think. How do we have a lot of these already, some of them are scaling reasonably well, but we're still not operating at the scale, scope, and speed that we need to be to address these problems. So it seems that a lot of this comes down to leadership. How do we push our leaders, political, business, and others, to be standing up, stepping up, speaking up, and taking the kinds of action. Is that even necessary for on the government side that this be a government push? Who are the leaders we need to have to drive this faster?
So I think that's a great question, and I think we should all thank Paul for doing all of the hard work for us of figuring out what the solutions are and where we need to be focusing. What comes next, though, is people taking hold of those solutions and putting them into play. And so leadership is a critical element of that, and I think something that's so exciting, I'm a Marinite, I've just learned. As we were preparing for this panel and I started to look at all of the work that's going on across Marin, I realized that we really have the opportunity to be a beacon, a community that is an example for others because we are taking those leadership steps here. We need business leaders to step up. We need civil society leaders to step up. We need governments to step up. And as 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 get the courage to move, then others have space where they can follow. And so this idea of leadership is more important now than ever because what we're dealing with is an unprecedented challenge that can create tremendous opportunity. But when we kind of get stuck in the, oh, this is so big and it's, you know, the whole world and all this stuff, it can be hard to take that first step forward. So what I would ask of everyone in this room is obviously you have self-selected to come to a panel like this because you care. And now how can you look in the sphere of influence that you have, whether it's your business or your school or your neighborhood, and how can you take a leadership role? Because when there's one person that pushes ahead and takes it, that others have more space to move. And we really can actually move the needle forward when it comes to this. So right now, we're lucky to be in a community that's leading. We're lucky to be part of a state that's leading. And how can we really encourage others outside of our 4 walls to join us?
So that's good, and yet I think a lot of people are saying, well, okay, so what do I do in my school? What do I say? What's the ask? What's the push? What do I want to see happen that isn't happening that I can influence? School doesn't have to be school. That's just one of the places.
Well, I'm not in school anymore, but I would say that I think that's a question that everyone has to understand is what is your influence? First of all, what is your impact? I think just understanding where you have impacts, where you have touch points with different people, with different parts of your community, that's a step. Using your voice is a step. How can you ask questions? If you're a business, how can you ask your suppliers certain questions that will help motivate them to look into their impacts and their operations? If you're in a school, how can you ask your teachers, your fellow students, and others about what they need to do and what you can do together to move things forward? Paul's given us the list of stuff that we can do. So if it's waste mitigation, if it's new energy choices, we have all of these tools available. It's picking one that's relevant to where you are and trying to figure out how you move it forward.
So, Paul, the book's been out for 4 or 5 months now, 5 months. It's going great. It's on Rising Up lists. Thank you in part to Bill Maher. Thank you for large part to just a great book with at the right time. People must be coming to you and saying, okay, this is amazing. Get it. I'm in. What do I do? How can I be? I'm not an entrepreneur. I don't own a business, but you've got me thinking here. But I don't know. I think that's the point at which a lot of people here and around the country and around the world get stuck.
They do get stuck there, but they would get even more stuck if they thought I knew the answer. Because I don't know them, I don't know you're going to be effective where you're respected and where you're listened to, number one. So I don't know who they are, I don't know where they live, I don't know the culture, the situation, the business, the company, the county, the politics. So they do ask us for advice, which, as I said, if I gave it, you should run because it would be wrong. And yet, there is this need for a call to action. And from our point of view, what we try to do is create hubs, drawdown hubs. So name the goal. We just did one in Nova Scotia. Now there's a drawdown Nova Scotia. Government, for sure. Business, for sure. Artists, for sure. schools, teachers, for sure, people, buildings and maintenance, for sure, farmers, in this case, fisher folk, in terms of Nova Scotia. So a hub is actually organizations that exist and people that are there already who care, and then organizing around a common goal, which is to reverse it, and then to provide them, which we do, this is what we're set up to do, with a constant flow of information. We're a living research institution. We don't, it's not one shot. We change the book every 30 days, actually. And
Wait. You change the book every 30 days?
Yeah.
How does that work?
By accident. If I had ever suggested that to my publisher, they would have just thrown me out. We have the plates. We designed the book. I chose the fonts, and we have the plates in design, Adobe. And so on the 9th of every month, just like 6 more days, we send new plates to Penguin Random House. And every time they do a printing, they print with the new plates. So it's a constant, yeah. I think it's the first book like that ever
So give me an example of what's changed since the
when
how many changes, how many new printings?
well, mistakes. We had a lot of errata. Most of those are gone.
What's the kind of thing that changes? The data?
The wind data has changed a lot. Solar's changing. We're seeing changes in like biochar, which is arcane for some people, but there. And new data came out that said it does not increase fertility in temperate climates, but does in tropical, and why. So we just have to be a constant source of that information. We have, in order to do this, we had no money, which I think was a blessing in disguise, or wasn't disguised at all, actually. It was just a blessing. So we put a call out all over the world for Drawdown Fellows to respected educational institutions, and we got overwhelmed by applications, and they were from, basically Rhodes Scholars and Fulbright Scholars and White House Fellows and Aga Khan Award winners. Had better CVs at 26 than I do now, and so they're just extraordinary people, and we got 70 of them from 22 countries and 6 continents, almost half women, half PhDs, all advanced degrees, and that's our core researchers. We paid the princely sum of $1,000 for basically a master's thesis. But now they're ongoing. We do pay them on an ongoing basis. Basically, what we're doing is creating a research institute that will have a flow of information to any NGO, government person, whoever wants it and can use it. That's up to them to use it, but who wants it in the world, so that no matter how you're organizing yourself, or where you are, what you're doing, what locale, what your point of entry is, what your interest is, so forth, you will find it all or some pertinent and relevance to you, and you can use it. And then what we're doing, working with UC Davis and several other universities, Imperial College in London, Hyderabad, Terry in Hyderabad, Australian National University, ASU, we will then localize it. So you can have a Drawdown Marin. It says Drawdown Marin, but you can have a model of Marin, exactly. Any political geographical boundary where you have a knowledge of inputs and outputs, then you can use the model. So that's where we're going with it.
So you mentioned these hubs.
Yeah.
And this is the Drawdown Coalition. Is that what that, or is that different?
Yeah, I mean, we started as a coalition because we feel like if 5 of us in Sausalito came up with all this information, we'd have all the credibility of a lentil. Come on, I mean, it's like, thank you for sharing, and but so we needed to produce a broad collaboration of the 70 scientists and the 120 advisors and the 40 outside expert scientific reviewers of the models, all of which are published, and the bios are in the book, and so forth. So when people looked at the who did it, it was like, wow, okay, they did their homework. These people wouldn't lend their names to this if we were doing a shoddy job. And so that was really important. But it was also important because really it's the smaller we talking to a bigger we. And like I said, this is what we know. It's not what Drawdown knows. It's certainly not what I know. It's what we reflect back to the world. You know, it's really important to understand that, because at the same time, I mean, what Leah's saying is we can accelerate. We've got to go faster, but all these things are scaling. And it's really important to know, you know, to take a breath and say, you know, humanity is on the case. And when we say it's the most comprehensive plan to reverse global warming, that's the subtitle of the book, you know, well, it is the most comprehensive plan because no one ever proposed one, so we got that one for sure. But the plan sounds like, well, we made a plan. We did not make a plan. We found a plan. And the plan is there, it's collective, it's not top-down. Some charismatic white male vertebrate is not announcing you the plan. It's actually us together all over the world. And somehow we've managed to figure this out. It doesn't mean we should sit back and say, wow. I mean, we have to go. We have a lot to do before 2050.
I want to get back to the hubs and what's possible here in Marin. And I know we're going to want to get to some questions. I think there's some cards or something being handed around. I don't know how that works, but we're going to get to the cards and the questions in a little bit. Leah, the role of business here. Let's talk about how business fits in. I mean, we know that business contributed to and caused so much of this, and there's also a lot of solutions there. And I think there's sort of two big buckets of business. One of the big companies, the kind that you used to work for, the ones that are just energy and resource intensive, and there's also millions of smaller businesses all over in every community. I'd love to hear your thoughts about how their role in taking on some of the big challenges, how both big companies and small local ones can be part of the solution.
So it's a good question. I think we spend a lot of energy on the big companies because they're the big contributors. But when you think about all of the medium and small businesses around the world, they actually make up the demand that so many of those companies are selling to. So in terms of a lever, it's a huge one. If you can get small and medium-sized businesses asking the people that they buy from to shift and sell them things that are more sustainable. So one piece is in your purchasing, one piece is in how you talk to your customers, and one piece is what you do within your four walls and your direct control. If I think about the supply chain aspect, it comes out of the right questions. It's making sure that coming out of Marin, the businesses are all asking, what is your carbon footprint? What are you doing to reduce it? Have you set a science-based target? Easy. When you think about your four walls.
What's a science-based target?
Yeah, I want to know too.
Oh, okay, sorry. I guess I spent a little bit too much time with my people. A science-based target is a target that's in line with a 2-degree emissions trajectory. So it's become a big push. It's become a big push for businesses to not just set a target that's incremental, that they think they can achieve, but to actually be looking at when they'll be achieving a net zero target. At the B team, we're actually advocating for a 1.5-degree target, which is why we've got net zero by 2050. And that is for the very easy reason that we like small islands. We would like them to be around in the future. I like to eat fish, coral reefs. Those are a good thing as well. And if we go beyond 1.5 degrees, actually, we will not have those parts of those critical ecosystems. So a science-based target is really just that, a target that's aligned with planetary science and saying that these are the boundaries.
And it's saying, in effect, to a company, what's based on that goal, what's our fair share of the problem that we need to be taking on?
Exactly. So, so I think just putting that in your procurement standards is a really easy first step that you can take. Then,
is that something that a small local company can do easily, can figure out what's their fair share? Is that a doable exercise, or does that take consultants and other things? And I don't mean that you used to be a consultant. I don't mean to.
I mean, I was. I have a confession.
Is that something that's easy to do?
It is. Yeah. No. Go to the Science Based Target Initiative. There's their website is probably sbti.com, but we can figure that out for everyone. And they can tell you how to set a science-based target. But really, it's if you want to do the quick and dirty, it's how do you get to net zero emissions by 2050? That can be your target. Then there's an idea of understanding where you are today to get there. And so what's that baseline? And that should look at not just your scope 1 and scope 2, which is what you kind of control. Scope 1 is direct combustion. Scope 2 is electricity you purchase, more or less. And scope 3 is your customers and your supply chain, so kind of outside of your direct control, and that's where those questions come in super handy. When you look at your direct things, I think you can either do on-site renewables, you can be thinking about buying, if you can't do that, if it's not an option for you, Marin has all of these fantastic options in terms of just purchasing electricity that really demonstrates your consumer choice. And then you can move forward. And then when you talk to your customers, it's incorporating this into the conversation. And I'm not talking about greenwashing, which I think we've all seen in spades, but actually really engaging with your customers to understand where they are and what they want. And all of you recognizing that you are customers yourselves, and how can you move that forward. So there are easy steps, but if you had to really think about it, I would say know your baseline, set a target, and then figure out a plan to achieve that target. And there are ways to do that where you're making money. It doesn't have to be a cost center, but it can actually be something that helps you become a leaner, meaner, more efficient business.
It sounds complicated.
It's easy.
It is, okay. I mean, it sounds, I like the idea of going to a website and typing in something and having an answer.
Mm-hmm.
That's it's called Google, I think. No,
It's amazing.
but it sounds it sounds just the scope. I'm playing devil's advocate here, but scope 1, 2, 3, baseline goals for a small business person. That's a lot of work that, and probably more than a little time than somebody has. Is that what it's needed? I mean, people say, can I just write a check? Can I just check a box? Can I just buy this instead of that? I think it's, I don't know, maybe this audience, they're committed and will spend the extra time and money to do these things. Why does it have to be so complicated?
Well, maybe it doesn't have to be so complicated, but I think that understanding, if you don't measure it, you can't manage it. So if you haven't actually taken the time to, and by the way, it is easy to get your baseline. If most of your emissions come from electricity, like most of the people, most small businesses, that is just going to Google and saying, I live here, convert this to CO2. So it doesn't have to be too complicated, but it comes down to asking questions, knowing your impacts, which knowledge is power, and usually you find a lot of waste when you start realizing that. Waste equals money that you're spending, and engaging with people in conversation. So, I don't know.
I'd like to take a slightly contrarian view here.
Do it.
2 degrees is not science-based. It was invented by a German scientist in 1994, Schellenhuber, and he pulled it out of thin air because the German ministry didn't understand the scientific papers. And they said, come on, we need something we can understand. He said, 2C. It's not science-based. The science is, there's a 4-to-1 range on how many more gigatons of CO2 we can emit before we hit 2C, from 125 billion to 500 billion. And it just expanded, by the way, last week in a new paper. So it's not science-based. But even if it was, let's say it was, the problem is it means nothing to almost every single person in the world. Think about it. It's like you wake up in Botswana, in Belgium, in wherever, and you say, hey, 2C. It's like zero recognition, zero meaning. And the core, to me, of the reason the climate establishment has failed is about communication. It's climate communication, not the science. The science is extraordinary, but the communication has been inept. And that's a future existential threat. 2C, 2C, 2C. What do we know from neuroscience? The human brain is not wired to respond to future existential threat. So what does the IPCC and everybody talk about? Oh, 2C or 1.5C or this C or that C. We don't work that way. We are going in the back door to humanity, and it's padlocked. And that's future existential threat. And we wonder why it's failing, why people don't respond, why they're numb, why they don't do anything. That's why. And the front door to humanity is wide open. It's wide open. It's called human needs. And what humans need is food and housing and support and dignified living wage jobs that give them self-respect, respect to their family, respect from their community, that mean something, that have purpose. And we're the only species without full employment. Think about that. Only one. And never has there been so many good jobs to do on Earth. And so the pathway to reversing global warming is to create 1 billion jobs that are regenerative development. And 98 of the 100 solutions in Drawdown are regenerative development, which means we heal the future and sell it in the present. Right now, we steal the future and sell it in the present. And so companies that are stealing, I'm sorry, if they're stealing the future and then getting their emissions right, it's like, well, that's good, and they should, and that's fantastic, but really, what a business are they in the first place?
So
And-
Paul, you're saying, just to be, I mean, I get the 2-degree thing that you're saying, but so the only goal that matters is drawdown?
The only goal that matters is humanity
Well,
and civilization. That's what matters. And our children and our children's children. That's what matters. What matters is life. That's what matters.
Yeah,
what I'm
okay,
just
so-
saying is we can't communicate that with 2C. That's all I'm saying. It has no meaning.
how do you communicate it? I mean,
I just did.
I don't think anyone's going to disagree.
I just did.
Well, but in terms of the goal that we need to be setting, because people need goals, people need doors to walk through. They need to have an endpoint, just some threshold that they need. What are we aiming for here? You know, it goes back to the if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. That's how most people think. No one's going to argue with humanity. No one's going to argue with food and well-being of people. And I want to talk a little bit about that in a second. But we need goals.
We do need goals, but the first goal should be to look at the situation as a whole and to realize that our communication is failing and that we're breathing our own exhaust in this area. And we're not really listening to people, and we're not responding to people's needs. And we wonder then, when people feel marginalized and have no value, that they vote for demagogues and dictators and oligarchs. That's why. And so unless we actually create jobs that actually have meaning, that really do address what humans need, and what we all need is the same. You know, I'm with Wonder Woman, only love will save us, okay? And so, you know, I mean, and that's true.
Yeah.
And so in terms of goals, there's no, everything that Leia's talking about is absolutely right in terms of businesses measuring. If you don't measure it, you can't manage it. And money's lying everywhere on the floor in those companies in terms of waste, in terms of the kind of energy they're using, the way they're using energy. Those are really credible, good things for business to do. But I'm saying it doesn't create employment for the billion people who don't have meaningful work.
Let's talk about that. Leah, you used a term when you first talked about B-Team and the work that you're doing, just transition. Explain what that means.
So just transition is really looking at how do you create this big economic shift that we're talking about in a way that's good for people. And I like to sort of divide it in 3 areas. One is this idea of human rights and climate justice, and thinking about how do we make sure that as we transition towards cleaner energy systems, towards different ways of doing things, that we're doing it in a way that actually thinks about the human impacts. For example, in the last couple of years, the places where we've had the biggest human rights violations reported have actually been renewables projects, and that's because there's been land grabs and things like that. So how do we make sure that as we're building up this new infrastructure, we're doing it in a way that takes care of people? The second part of it is around the workforce transition. And so I think we spend a lot of time thinking about the jobs that will disappear in coal communities, but there's also new jobs being created every day. And how do we make sure that those are good jobs that pay a living wage, that provide pensions, that provide health care, and that we're actually thinking about our workers and our communities as we redo, as we kind of decide the path for business. And then the third area is thinking about all of the people that are currently excluded from the economy and from economic benefit, and how do we redefine and reimagine an economy that does all the things that Paul's talking about, that feeds people, that brings them in, that provides opportunities to people that didn't have them before. So those are 3 big buckets, and that's at the 500,000 foot level. But at the end of the day, it requires planning and conversation and engaging with communities as you think about that transition. So for a place like Marin, where you have so many businesses that are already taking the first step, you have citizens that are engaged, but we also have our fair share of poverty. We have our fair share of people that are not included in a lot of conversations. And how do we actually think about the new jobs that are going to be needed and matching those with people that don't have jobs today or people that might lose jobs as we divest from things that are no longer going to be part of the solution. So it's really about the transition with dignity, with human dignity.
So I've got a lot more questions, but I know that so do. Give it up for human dignity. All right. I have a lot more questions, but I know so do you. So I'm going to move over to the podium and welcome back to the stage to be part of the Q&A, Dana Armanino. Dana? Come on back. Wow, we have these. Deal me in. Okay, look at this, all those cards.
Can you read it?
Yeah, I can read it. I got glasses. Come on. So, carbon pricing is the first question. So we're going to get right down to the really easy things. Please discuss the role of a global carbon price in aligning economic incentives to accelerate the deployment of your solutions.
Well, they're not my solutions. They're our solutions. Nothing will accelerate all those solutions faster than carbon pricing. There's good ways and bad ways to do it, but it's the #1 policy instrument, no question about it. Yeah.
Leah, is that something B team is working on? Do you work on the policy side?
Yes, in short, we are working on it, but it's certainly something that's politically fraught. So I totally agree. If you could get one thing that would accelerate most of the stuff that we're talking about today, it would be a price on carbon. In the absence of that, we need to start thinking about value of carbon. And right now, we see more value in combusting carbon and burning it versus actually using it as a material that can create all sorts of interesting things. So I would say that there's 2 pieces to it. One, if you can work the policy angle and people are working it hard every single day, that's absolutely critical. But 2, it's not limiting us to one policy fix is going to change that. But also thinking about what are some of the cool things that you can do with that recaptured carbon. And one of the coolest things I've seen, which does not go near to capturing the value that it needs to capture in order to be cost effective, is a pair of carbon shoes that we made at our old NRG. So tennis shoes out of captured carbon from a coal plant. So the world is your oyster. We just need to really reframe in our head what we think of it. Is it waste that we are just throwing away, or is it something that we're going to put value on either through a policy fix or through a market mechanism of another kind?
Yeah. Dana, who's going to guide making the climate efforts for Marin County? How will you involve the whole community in decision making?
Well, so tonight I was talking about our goals for 2020, which is very quickly approaching. So now we need to look beyond that to our further goals down the road. And so we'll be looking at 2030, 2050, and we're going to re-examine our climate action plan process. Is it just going to be a document that we throw a bunch of stuff into, or is it going to be more of a living thing that we can use and adjust and involve the community in as we build it? And so we're starting to make those considerations now. The Marin Climate and Energy Partnership is also looking towards the 2030 climate action planning and implementation for going ahead. So all of that will be rolling out in probably the coming year or two. So we'll absolutely be asking for all of the experts that we have in the room and in the county to help us inform that process and develop it.
There's some juicy questions here. Some of the solutions to drawdown require significant lifestyle changes for Marin citizens. Do you believe the people living in one of the richest counties in the richest country can commit to reducing their standard of living?
Name the solution.
Well, they didn't, but we'll talk, I don't know.
I don't know what that solution is.
Yeah.
What? What about them?
Individual cars wasn't a solution, or was there any related to car ownership or mobility?
Both. There's public transportation, and there is EVs,
Yeah.
and then there's autonomous vehicles, and there's CVs, so bicycles.
Yeah. So you're saying basically that there is no trade-off here. There's nothing that you're talking about in drawdown that reduces impacts our great way of living.
Oh, listen, Marin, goodness sakes, I mean, these 20,000 square foot mansions are being built, and I mean, you see Marin magazine, you open it up and go, oh my God, I mean, do they know which century they're living in? I mean, they're building things for basically the golden age, you know? And so you see enormous, I mean, I don't know where to go with this one, but I'm just saying is money coming into this county and spending it as if, you know, there was no tomorrow, and if they spend it that way, there won't be a tomorrow. That's true. And so I can't speak to that. No, I can't, but I can speak to people, mothers and fathers and people who live here, who lived here a long time, and it actually makes life better. These solutions make life much better, quieter, cleaner, and it's a huge improvement in lifestyle. Yeah. I don't believe and I don't convince either. I'm not interested in convincing anybody what to do. That's not my job.
Leah, anything to pile on?
In terms of Marin, human behavior is changing. That is one of the hardest things to change, but you can do it. And it comes down to offering sort of a better choice or a better lifestyle. So I think there's a lot of really brilliant marketing minds out there. I know a couple of them. And it's how do you actually make the future we're talking about cooler and more enjoyable and more fun. So, and that's for Marin, where people have the money that they can make those choices. In other places, you have to think about how do you make it more cost effective or whatever. But an interesting fact, when it comes to solar adoption, if I look at three markets that I know well, Texas, the survivalists, they like to adopt the solar because they can really get it. In New Jersey, it's the people that want to save money, you know, lower middle class families that really see the impact on their bill. And in California, it's the gadget heads. They want to try something new. So I think that there's ways to appeal to people and to transition and transform it. And it just requires some good research and then some really smart storytellers.
Dana, this is about the Novato Unified School District food service program eliminated all red meat in 2008 and also increased the number of plant-based options served to students. How do we get every school district in Marin and then beyond to follow that same path?
Nevada Unified School District is an excellent leader, and that leading came from staff. There was a very committed person up there that had a vision, did the homework to make the case for his argument. I think each school district has its own board, so it's going to take committed people in each school district coming to their board and the staff with an idea and showing that it can work, and showing that the commitment is there, the desire is there. I believe he started with 1 day a week and just showing that the meat wasn't missed that one day. There are so many options out there, so it takes it from the ground up to do it, and I think it absolutely can be done in all our school districts.
Is it just parents speaking up? Is it, what kind of actions would you like to see people take?
I think a lot of actions can start actually with the students. I mean, we had the two students here tonight. They're the voice. They're the ones that are the customers of that school district. So I think they need to speak up first. and committed parents as well. The board, will listen to parents as well. But I do think that it can be done.
Just one on that. This isn't about the school district per se, but an airline I know pretty well decided about a year ago just to take beef off the menu, and they haven't gotten a single complaint because they didn't publicize it, they didn't do anything about it, they just removed the choice. So I think there's also some top-down stuff you can do.
Who eats that stuff?
I know the
anyway?
airline. I just wish they'd get a chef as well, though.
So here's a question about electricity. So Leah, this should be in your wheelhouse. As we convert from natural gas to electricity, electrification of vehicles, electrification of things that now have used combustion or home heating systems, for example. At what point does the electrical grid become overloaded and not able to accept any more conversions of natural gas to electricity?
I mean, I don't know the answer to that. Do
you
you know
think
it, Paul?
Well, I want to address it. What we saw, our nose is pressed to the window or the glass for 2.5 years on the numbers, the economics. And what we saw and what we see is astonishing, by the way. And we always had a bias to the conservative, but we're kind of looking around and going, do you see what, we all saw the same thing, and this is what we see. Number one, the prices in storage are crashing. There's a great piece by Tony Siga and James Airbeep at Stanford. Look it up or Google it. Basically what they did is they looked at solar and they looked at wind and they looked at why IEA and every other group in the world, McKinsey, has got it wrong for every year for 20 years in terms of predicting the rate of growth and the rate at which costs would go down. And the IEA finally said 2 months ago, yes, we've got it wrong every year for 20 years. And so what they did is they went back and created a model that would have predicted basically what happened in solar and wind, and then applied it to CVs, connected vehicles, AVs, autonomous vehicles, EVs, and to storage. And it'll blow your mind. It'll blow your mind. I mean, basically, the rate at which these are going to basically crash the utilities, crash the grid, basically wipe out, the built-in infrastructure of what's out there, and the rate at which we will adopt these. And you can see it. Look at GM just announced going electric. I mean, Ford just was right there with them. I mean, the rate at which you see the change, why are they doing that? Because they know it works. In 2023, around they're saying, that is, EVs will be cheaper than ICEs with no subsidies, okay? And then the range anxiety, I mean, it'll be solved. I mean, even more so. I'm not saying it doesn't right now. You have a graphene nano batteries right now was put in a Tesla. The Tesla went from here to San Diego and back on one charge. Okay, so I'm just saying what's coming is extraordinary, and you can just, I mean, look at, there's a lot of really serious things that are coming. We saw 2 Cat 5 hurricanes in one island within 30 days. Unprecedented. So I'm not trying to be a Panglossian here, but I'm saying in those areas of solar and wind, renewable, clean energy, storage, grids, EVs, AVs, get out of here or hold on to your hat. I mean, it's going to be shockingly quick and surprising as how it disrupts the entire world economy.
Yeah, and the utilities know that, and they're
scared.
They're scared. Yeah, they are. So, my ultra-conservative, and then they put a little carrot in case you didn't know that, ultra-conservative right wing. My ultra-conservative right-wing father who lives in Montana would be happy to see San Francisco and New York City wash away in rising oceans. That's not a question, it's just a statement. No, there's a question here.
That's while Montana's burning, right?
How can we reach him and get guys like him to see the horrors of climate change? Although at friendly amendment, I'd also say the possibilities, the opportunities around climate change. How do we reach those people who are not us?
So, may I take a crack at this one, and then?
You bet.
So I think that part of this comes down to a language issue. If you want to go around the country and make everyone believe in climate change like it's a belief system, then you're going to run into a lot of resistance. But if we start to meet people where they are and think about what they care about and putting it into language that they are interested in, you can get them to embrace some of the solutions that can help us with climate change. So it goes back to what I was saying about sort of the New Jersey people versus the Texas people versus the Californians. Each of those consumers were interested in something different. None of them were saying, I want to solve climate change, but they had a reason that they could connect to different solutions. And so I would say, don't spend a lot of time debating with your right-wing, very conservative father in Montana about whether he's right or wrong, but actually think about what he cares about and how do you actually move him towards the things that are going to help bring in part of that solution. Because we'll waste a lot of time if we are trying to make everyone believe what we believe and think the way we think. But we can drive adoption because this future that we're painting is a future that people want to be part of. I spent a lot of time with unions, and one of the things that I found really interesting is the language that they use around climate. And it's not climate change, but what Sharon Burrow says, the General Secretary of the ITUC, which basically every union person in the world votes for her, and she is super badass if you have a chance to meet her. But her mantra and the platform she ran on was no jobs on a dead planet. And that resonated. And that accelerated. And 100 million people cast a vote for her because of that platform. So I would just say, I think that all of us can spend some time preaching and doing our thing. And it might feel good, but it probably won't get us to the outcome we're going for. So let's be pragmatic and think about what will.
All right, great. Let's see if we can get, we got, I think, 7 or 8 more minutes before we get the hook, so let's get a few more questions in. There's a great question here on how does Drawdown, the solutions in Drawdown, correlate with the United Nations, the 17 goals, the global goals, or the Sustainable Development Goals, as they're formally known. How do they correlate? Do they correlate, or should they?
Perfectly, with the SDGs and the NDCs too, the nationally determined commitments. I mean, we haven't made the table. We're going to for the Commonwealth of Nations, where we do the solution and then we do the SDGs. Sometimes it's more than one. And what does it do for that nation's nationally determined commitment in terms of COP 22 and 23? They correlate perfectly. It's just that the goals are hard. It's hard to implement a goal. You need a solution that implements the goal. You need something that you can do. The goals are overarching and the solutions are specific.
So is that, should there be more coordination between Project Drawdown and the United Nations, or is there already?
Not that I know of. But we just hatched, you know, we're only 5 months old, and if anybody wants a job, come to me afterwards. By the way, we're hiring.
Watch out.
Right now we're in the take a number thing, and people say, well, here, take a number, we'll get back to you. It's kind of like a deli at lunchtime right now, and we simply are understaffed to deal with the amount of requests that are coming in. I hope we work with the UN.
This one, well, Leah or Dana, what's the best way or process to bring together the many sectors of our community to collaborate on these common goals, the goal of net zero by 2050? Leah?
So one of the best, I think there's a lot of ways to do it. Conversations like this is a start, but one of the best processes I've seen is something called System in a Room, where you literally invite every single person representing different sectors of your community to come together and spend 3 days going from an idea of a vision, how might we achieve net zero by 2050, to actual solutions that we can get around. And a good friend of mine's in the audience here as well, and the two of us have spent a lot of time working with different sectors, whether it was the U.S. recycling sector or the U.S. dairy industry, or you name it, you know, different groups, to ask questions like that. that were relevant to driving systems change. And I think the important thing to realize when we're dealing with a community is that no one individual holds the key, but it's going to be that collective effort. So taking the time to enroll and work closely with your community members and stakeholders throughout the value chain will actually drive much more creative, interesting solutions than if someone sat in a back room and put together a plan and then said, this is the plan, adopt it. So I would highly recommend if there's ways to do that kind of engagement, the more you talk, the more people take ownership over the outcome. And that ownership is critical when we're dealing with as many difficult behavior changes that are going to be required to achieve this goal.
And I'd just like to jump in. That's absolutely what we want to consider as we're looking towards our next target setting and planning for programs for the next cycle. But I also want to do, in the near term, do a plug for the Sustainable Enterprise Conference, which will bring together a lot of our business community and our chambers of commerce to have a discussion about a lot of these measures and implementation efforts that are going on. And that'll be Thursday, October 26th over at the Embassy Suites. So I hope I can see a lot of you guys there as well.
I have a couple questions about overpopulation. Where does that fit in all of this? Apparently there's I didn't see a list of actions we can take in Marin that reducing the population here is conspicuously absent. None of you, I don't know if you had a hand in making that card.
I'm going to pass this one off to the other folks.
Yeah. Well, let's take another swing at this topic. Paul, you said that the single most important way to reduce global warming is to empower women and girls. How is Marin doing in that regard? You or anybody?
It's funny. I was in Marlborough House in London with the giving drawdown to talk to the high commissioners of the 52 nations that comprise the Commonwealth. And after I was done, there was a woman from a Caribbean nation, and she looked at me and he said, "This is nonsense. We take very good care of our girls. It's the boys that we need to educate. They do the devil's work. They do the devil's work."
Nice brogue, dude. That was good. How are you doing in Marin on educating women and girls?
I don't work on the education sector, so I can't speak to that. I do know that we have a lot of community groups doing amazing things in that area, and a lot of opportunities for girls in Marin.
F-gases, Holly? I don't know what F-gases are. HFCs. Oh, yeah, okay. What is Marin doing about F-gases and open super pollutants? Methane is included in your land use strategy, but what, if anything, is Marin doing on the other short-term forces? Thank you. Wow.
So refrigeration, HFCs. So we have on our municipal program goals to try and monitor for leaks and address them ASAP. We don't have any measures on our community side to address refrigeration leaks. That is missing from our plan and something we can address in the future. And then, yes, as you pointed out, we do have programs for reducing methane emissions from our agricultural community through methane digesters. We'd like to get some more installed. We have 2 already. And then we are trying to assist our ranchers with applications for a manure management program, which would help address some of those emissions and actually put that manure to use as compost for application on those rangelands.
So there's a lot more questions and a lot more people who have solutions. Felix Kramer would love to talk to you about his Drawdown Wiki. I'm sure he'll make himself known. Wait, there he is. Okay, good. And you'll get a chance to meet a lot of the solutions providers back out in the lobby. Before I let you go, let me ask you one final question, each of you. When we meet back here in 3 years at Drawdown Marin 2020, how do you hope the conversation will have changed? Paul?
I don't hope. No, really.
Well,
really.
what's your wish?
No, I mean, I want to say something about hope. Hope is the mask of fear. And in my training, we don't hope because we actually want to be fearless. And what I want to be now, right up into 3 years from now, is to be fearless about what we do, who we are, who we talk to, what we say, and what we're willing to engage in, as if this really effing mattered. And the fact is that I go out in the world and people, like, it doesn't really matter to this country yet and to most of the world, and we have to make it matter. And so that takes fearlessness, and whatever the outcome is in 3 years, hallelujah, if we are acting in such a way. That's how I see it.
Okay. Leah, what's the conversation you hope we'll be having in 3 years?
The conversation I want to be having is how we all influence someone else to take this on. So I think it's great to have this committed core of people working hard, but we are not enough to get where we need to be. So I think channel that fearlessness and bring other people into this conversation, bring other people into the solutions, and start demonstrating what we can get done, because there is tremendous urgency to do something different. And it's not just within what we each do as individuals, but it's what we do to move 10 other people with us, 20 other people, an entire supply chain. So that's the kind of thing that I want to see. I want to see us collaborating and working hard and bringing new people into the conversation and putting aside what we think is the right solution so that we can hear from other people what is the right solution for them, and really kind of rolling up our sleeves.
Dana?
Well, you kind of took my thunder on that one. I was going to say, yeah, I would like to see in 3 years new faces. I love all of your faces, but I want to see
Good faces.
they're very nice. But I want to see new people out there. I want to have the discussion and not have it be a discussion of, oh, we have to draw down. But these are some amazing solutions just for your comfort, for saving money. This isn't just an argument about, oh, we have to reduce to make our climate goals. It's that we can make a better Marin, a more comfortable Marin, a cooler Marin with gadgets and everything else, and that it's not just the choir preaching. It's that we've found a way to connect with everybody else.
So more people involved, new faces, more collaborations, more partnerships, bringing others along on this journey, and being fearless. I'm down with all that. Before I bring one final person to the podium, please join me in thanking Dara, Leah, and Paul. And to close out the evening, please join me in welcoming real champion here in Marin for climate and so many other things, Supervisor Kate Sears.
Good evening, everyone. I really want to start my remarks by pointing out and acknowledging Milo and Cameron and all of the other young people. Yeah, they need another hand. And all of the other young people we've had helping us with this program tonight. These people are our future. They are the young people who already are our leaders and certainly will continue to be our leaders and our activists in the future. These are the young people who will confront the climate disruption that is the legacy of our generation. These young people give me hope, and they also underline how urgently all of us must take action. We've heard tonight about what has been done, what is being done, and most importantly, why it is crucial that all of us take significant action now. We've heard that the level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere has already exceeded 410 parts per million, the highest in the last 800,000 years. Because CO2 remains in the atmosphere for thousands of years, we are approaching a dangerous greenhouse gas threshold, which, if crossed, will mean we will no longer be able to influence the course of future global warming. The planet has already witnessed nearly 1 degree Celsius of warming, and another 0.6 degrees Celsius of additional warming is currently stored in the ocean, to be released over the next 2 to 4 decades if climate warming emissions are not radically reduced. The choices that we make today will determine the magnitude of climate change risks for decades ahead. To avoid potentially catastrophic consequences and protect the futures of the young people who are here tonight and for those who come after, we must act boldly to reduce emissions, and we must act now. We not only must bend down the rising emissions curve and thus bend down the curve of warming temperatures, we must bend the curve to declining emissions by 2020. That's only 2 years from now. We all must act now, and we must act effectively. We've heard tonight about strategies we should push forward on a much broader scale. 100% renewable energy, low carbon transportation, and energy efficiency. We've heard that 1/3 of Marin County's greenhouse gas emissions come from residential and commercial building energy use, and over 1/2 are generated by combustion engine vehicles. All of us need to challenge ourselves as a county and as individuals to not just talk about the challenge of climate change, but to take action to dramatically reduce emissions from our homes, our businesses, and the vehicles we drive. We can't wait for anyone to reduce climate change for us. Innovation and boldness starts in our own homes, and it starts in our minds. Each of us is the activist and the innovator who will start using 100% renewable energy, who will choose to replace our gas-powered furnace with an electric model, will check out convection ovens and unplug our energy-guzzling computers, iPhones, and iPads. We are the ones who will decide to try out an electric vehicle, share cars and rides, and challenge ourselves to see how often we can use an electric bike instead of a car. It is each of us who will dramatically reduce food waste, the top third most impactful strategy identified in Project Drawdown, by purchasing only as much food as we will eat. We also will choose to eat a plant-rich diet, the fourth most impactful strategy identified in Project Drawdown. We will work together to convince the owners of commercial buildings to install solar panels and retrofit for energy efficiency, and to convince our county, cities, and towns to adopt net zero energy standards for all new construction and major remodels. And we are the ones who, in Paul Hawkins' terminology, will act like carbon and link arms to make sure that our future is one that we really can live in and want to live in. So California Governor Jerry Brown recently said, it's time for courage, it's time for creativity, and it's time for boldness to tackle climate change. The risk is real, the cost is huge and growing, and therefore, taking a sequence of realistic steps just makes sense. And that's what we're going to do in California. And that's what I call on all of us to do here in Marin. I call on us to be bold, to be creative, to have courage, and to work together to implement the realistic strategies of our Drawdown Marin initiative. Each of you in this room has a role to play in taking the decisive actions that will protect future generations. So get energized, learn more, use less, and please just do it. I really want to thank all of you and also our wonderful speakers for being here this evening and for really understanding the fierce urgency of now. And I hope that you will now join us in the foyer for dessert and refreshments and further conversation. And let me remind you, you all have that colorful card in your program. On that card is a place to write down what it is, the actions that you want to take. And also, please write your address on the other side. Put it all in the basket on your way out. We want to be able to contact you and let you know the date of future events, because as Damon Connolly said when he opened up this program, this is the launch, this is the beginning, and we have lots of collective efforts and workshops and events coming forward. So thank you again for being here.